Welcome back to the show, everybody. This is the Upper Tier Podcast. Joining me tonight, as always, the Dazzler himself, Darren. And tonight we're going to take a look at football contracts and we're going to have a conversation about them in light of kind of recent events and stuff like that. We're going to take a look at the Bosman ruling. We're going to have a look at some contractual structures. We're going to look at the pros and cons of a potential draft system like the NFL. Can't see it ever happening, but we said we'd look at it anyway. And then we'd look at some of the maddest clauses that have been inserted into footballers' contracts over the years, and we'll have a bit of fun with that at the end of the show. How are you, my friend?
I'm all good, brother. I'm all good.
Good. Generally speaking, I mean, what's your feeling on these football contracts? I mean, are they worth the paper they're written on, or?
Um, it's a tough one, to be honest with you. I think the players have started to wrestle the power away from the clubs in recent years, haven't they?
Yeah.
There's been a huge, step towards player power, as opposed to just, you work for us and this is the rules and this is the law. And because we don't seem to have a lot of it in everyday life, Like, I can't necessarily go in if I work for Facebook and tell the boys up me money or I'm going to Google, and because if I do, my boss is going to say, don't worry, out you go. There's another 20 behind you waiting on that gig. So it's not,
And you'll be going to Google.
do you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
whereas with footballers, it's completely different. And they always seem to be, they're a funny share of footballers, aren't they? They always seem to want to find themselves on the up. Now, I get that completely, but I think at times guys are trying to run before they can walk, in a contractual sense and stuff like that. And they've got a very small number of games under their belt, but they've an agent who sees them being a much bigger fish, maybe later on, and they're trying to shoot for those bigger contracts earlier on. Then you've guys who are, dying out of the game and stuff like that and getting to the twilight of their career and they're looking for big paydays. And I think the agents for me are the real villains here, shall we say? I completely get why they're there. I understand the role of an agent and what they're to do for the player and stuff like that. And obviously their cut has got to be made from somewhere. But I just think, I think there has to be other ways to do it. There really has to.
Yeah, a couple of things triggered me on this. One, obviously, was the recent one, the Mbappe one, where they were giving him control nearly at a board level and stuff like that, and he kind of had them over a barrel. And I don't know whether his intention was ever really to go to Real Madrid. I wonder, was he using them as a pawn to get what he wanted out of PSG? The other ones that triggered me was I mean, obviously the area of agents and stuff like that, it's quite a murky area. But then we talk about Kevin De Bruyne, who we've learned negotiated his own new contract with Man City,
Yeah,
signed, sealed, dusted, delivered. Now, albeit they know the value of Kevin De Bruyne and they've paid him a handsome amount of money, let's say. But still, he didn't feel the need to have these guys involved and stuff like that. And then we listened to the Holland deal and the original deal that was out there before, where his agent wanted 10 million and his dad wanted 10 million. I think it was either 10 million or 20 million, whatever it
it
was.
was
Anyway,
10. Yeah, that's right. It was 10 a
10,
pop.
it was 10 and 10, wasn't it? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it was just, it just became absolute greed. Um, I mean, what you're thinking when you think of those kind of dynamics?
That's exactly kind of what I'm talking about. Like, that's where agents are taking over the footballing world, and that's what needs to be outlawed. I don't know whether there's got to be a fit and proper person's test for you to become an agent, like there is an owner. I don't know if there's got to be there's got to be a set of guidelines. I know there are regulations for agents and stuff like that, but I think at times it's the disingenuous nature of the role, when you're trying to lead somebody up a garden path to believe that they can sign X, Y, and Z player, knowing that this is only a smokescreen to go to the right and to get that move that you've been angling for and stuff like that. I think that's very wrong. I think, again, it's very hard to prove these things, but if you can be proven to be leading a club down the wrong path, on a player who has no interest in making that kind of a move, but you've involved them and you've used them as a pawn in your game. That we want that to be outlawed from football, surely.
Yeah,
Because that,
we spoke about it, didn't we, on the Mbappe episode, where we spoke
yeah,
about how hurt now, and I know a lot of our viewers here at the moment won't have a lot of sympathy for Real Madrid when it comes to these things either. But I think Real Madrid and La Liga, they were genuinely hurt at the way this all transpired, weren't they?
well, here's the thing. I would differ slightly from you because I very much believe that Mbappe had got intentions of going to Real Madrid. But what I don't think he was aware of was what PSG would do to keep him. So obviously, they had put money on the table and they'd said, we'll give you A, B, and C. But then the longer it dragged on and the more it looked like he would exit stage left at PSG and head towards Madrid, I think PSG decided we've got to pull something out. I mean, I don't necessarily believe he went into that situation thinking he was going to get control of sporting operations at PSG. I don't necessarily think he wanted it either. But I think when somebody hands you this thing and says, this is as far as we're going, or as we're willing to go to get you to stay at the club, all of a sudden then there's a realization that, well, actually, I do have these guys over a massive barrel right now. And I could probably just reach around and grab a little bit more than I want. But it's a nice feeling as well, isn't it? For him, he's probably going, well, they want me to. And if we look at what's going on at PSG at the minute, like we fully expect the boy Campos to come in and take Leonardo's job, and then we fully expect another manager to come in and take Pochettino's job. And they're
Mm.
talking about that this is all on the back of the Neymar or on the back of the Mbappe situation. So
How
already this is
how
shown its teeth in
yeah
quite an ugly manner. Like,
how far does that go before you have to should someone like UEFA or someone who oversees these contracts, should they be stepping in and saying, okay, we understand the money, we understand the image rights, we understand the value that a club puts on you and stuff like that, but can you really insert that into a contract to have that control at a sporting level and stuff like that? And should it go that way? And is this the beginning of just more and more and more and more? Are we eventually going to see a situation where? Are we eventually going to see a situation where they've so much control that they're sitting at a board level, and controlling these things? And where does that end then? And how far does it go?
I think it's very hard for UEFA to police it. I think they may decide to try and say, listen, we're going to cap what you can propose, be that financial, image rights, bonuses, structure of payments, and stuff like that. Like, I think they can do as much of that as they want. I don't think even UEFA would have seen a situation where PSG were willing to hand over control of sporting operations to a player.
Yeah.
I think this is unprecedented, and I think this is going to be the exception to the rule, not the rule.
Well,
Because I don't think
we seen a similar situation at Barcelona, didn't we? Except it wasn't written into the contract.
um
I
well,
mean,
I mean,
Messi had huge influence there for years, didn't he?
he absolutely had huge influence, and if you're looking at these guys and you're talking about a Messi and an Mbappe, these are two of the best footballers on the planet. They're two huge, huge footballing talents, and they're two guys that these are the premier players in world football, or two of them anyway. To have them at your club gives you a massive, massive advantage. So to keep them at your club, I think clubs will do everything within their possibilities and their realms to keep them. But I don't see that necessarily being the case with 99% of footballers. It's only that very, very small minority, that 1% that will garner that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like in theory, what owners are going to say? It can only be owners like a PSG maybe, or something like that. I mean, obviously at Barcelona there was nothing contractual about it. It was just a given that this guy has led us, the right direction all the time, that
Mm.
we would seek his advice. But I think at clubs at times, you know, when there's senior players and stuff like that, you've seen them go on and take up roles at the club where they've been respected and they would try and push the club in a certain direction. So I think if that's happened before as well, you know, you see ex players going into clubs as managers and stuff like that and having an influence based on their previous record at the club. So I don't think that's unheard of either.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, I mean the concerning thing would be the way UEFA have obviously policed financial fair play and stuff like that. They haven't done a fantastic job of that.
or
But
fail to police
but
as you would.
yeah, but that's where I'm coming from. But I
Yeah.
suppose when you look at these contracts and stuff like that, you wonder like, would they be able to go in and look at that in terms of being a potential conflict of interest? You know what I mean? It's in terms of the structure of a company and stuff like that. You can nearly align it nearly to the point of nearly insider trading, if you like. That kind of way. It just seems weird that a guy who's I understand a guy who's a player and becomes a legend at a club and decides then to become an ambassador or take a role upstairs or whatever
Mm.
it is. His playing days are then done. So there's no conflict of interest. If you're talking about a guy who's taking control of some of those matters and he's still kicking ball on the pitch, it's to me it's a very dangerous area to be in, isn't it?
Well, so like from my point of view, I would ask where the conflict of interest is because he's not necessarily sitting on two different sides. He's sitting on the one side. Do you know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like, he's going to do. Yes, okay. We've heard the talk of he's going to give himself a pay rise and he's going to sack the coach and he's going to do this and do this. And I get that, but it's all still club based. He doesn't necessarily have sway in the wider world and stuff like that, of football. And he knows if he leaves PSG, he leaves all that behind him because you can guarantee if he goes for Real Madrid or he goes for Liverpool, nothing like that is on the table, and that's why I believe he was firmly, he had his mind made up he was going to Real Madrid, and it was only very, very late in the day when PSG said, you know what, actually, we're going to give you something you've only ever dreamt of. And he went, no, you're not really. And they went, yeah, we are. And I think that when he went, oh, wow, that's. And I don't think we can blame him if we're honest. I mean, if somebody was going to give you that amount of power,
no, we blame
would
the
you say
club.
no to it? Absolutely.
We blame the club wholeheartedly.
Absolutely.
One of the things I wanted to look at in relation to this was the Bosman ruling, and it's never more prevalent at the moment than it is now.
Mm-hmm.
Where you see, just 1 second, the mascot just wants to go out. Where you see at the moment a lot of players at the moment. Are we seeing a change in contracts now, where more and more players are going to run down their contracts and walk on a free?
Yeah,
Um, is that going to become more and more in your mind?
100%. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the only positive to that will possibly be the deflation of prices because if I know I'm going to get a certain amount of the market on a free transfer because I'm paying a signing on fee and a wage, I'm not then necessarily going to get involved of taking a player from another team when they've got 2 years left in their contract or 3 years left. Do you know what I mean? I think it
Yeah,
will change the market exponentially, but I think that gives a lot more power to the player and it makes things a lot more difficult for the clubs to actually, if you're a smaller club and you're relying on selling players to keep your club in a good financial position, that becomes difficult then because if you're at, let's say you're at a Brighton, and let's say you go out and you pay £15 million for a player, Leandro Trossard from the Belgian league, he comes in, does a great job. All of a sudden, his value goes up to 30, 35 million, and he decides, you know what, I'm not going to sign a new contract. I'm going to run it down. He doesn't have to leave. He's within his rights to stay. You know, he hangs on in there, goes for free. Brighton's 15 million's gone down to Swanee, for want of a better word. That money will never come back. And I think this is a huge threat to how football is being built. I think it's something, again, like the way the Bosman ruling came in initially, and Jean-Marc Bosman and stuff like that. And obviously he went to the courts of the European courts
mm.
and stuff like that to get this ruling. I think we'll have to see a rule on the other side. I think we'll have to see a rule on the club side, which has to, like the Bosman rule is protecting the player. I feel
Yeah,
like the clubs are going to have a rule or a ruling fall on their side to protect the club that says, I don't know if you've got a certain amount of time left on your contract. We know when you get to the last 6 months of your contract that you have to, you can maybe look abroad, and then at the end of that contract, you can then look in the country you're playing in. We know that's the rule anyway, right? I don't know
Yeah.
if there's something that says when you get to the last 2 years of your deal, if you've no interest in signing a contract, that the fee has to be set at, a fixed fee or something like that, where a club can afford to come in and buy you out. Do you know what I mean? I just feel like something is going to have to happen,
Yeah.
because
No, I think. Yeah. No,
the players are just going to keep sitting on contracts and rolling now. And when you have a player that's getting 200 or 300 grand a week on the bench, and he can make a difference to your team, you're going to play him, because you're going to go, you know what, we have to play this guy because that gets us closer to the end goal. That gets us
Yeah.
closer up further up that league table, that Champions League, whatever it is. And then all of a sudden his contract's gone and he walks out the door and you go, I now have to replace that.
Yeah.
I think
I,
something will have to happen.
I wonder, is there something you could put in contractually that says, kind of, and it's similar to the Bosman situation and stuff like that, where a club could insert in a player's contract that in the event that you leave on a free, let's call it that for the moment,
Mm-hmm.
um, if you get a signing on fee with a club, let's say Mbappe, let's say he had a sign for Madrid as an example, and he got 100 million signing on.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a situation where you could have put a clause in the contract to say, well, the club is entitled to 30% of that
So then
or
they'll take away the
something?
signing on fee and they'll bump up his wages.
Yeah, well, they'll always kind of find a loophole, but there's a way.
So that's your
Yeah, but then there'd have to be a way of tying it down some way that when a player moves on a free, there has to be a legitimate signing on
well,
fee there or
I
something.
see what I think they'll do is, rather than look at the actual move on the free, I think they'll make it earlier in the contract, because you don't get to the free then. Do you know what I mean? I
Yeah,
think they'll have to look at maybe the 2 year scenario, when we know, that you're getting to that scenario where I'm not going to sign a contract. There's 2 years left on it. I play this season, then all of a sudden I'm open to start having conversations. I think if you sign a deal anything over 4 years, I think they're going to have to look at those last even 18 months, even say 18 months, because we
mm,
know that gives you a year before the 6 months kicks in and stuff like that. But I think it's something they're going to have to look at, the clubs, and to try and get something nailed down,
mm.
that, there has to be some sort of mutual agreement between the club and the player that benefits the club rather than just the player, because clubs are going to go out of business at this. This is the problem.
Yeah, well, that's my concern. You see, because if you look at a player in there as a club, he's an asset, he's an
Yeah,
investment.
absolutely.
And like clubs aren't going to keep on investing in investments that don't provide a return on investment.
Absolutely.
Now, players will argue that the return on the investment is that
Is what happens on the pitch.
I'm committed
Yes.
to you for 5 years. I'm increasing your brand. I'm growing your business. Blah 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 blah. Um, but it's a difficult one. I mean, if you take, let's take Mo Salah as an example. There's Mo Salah, who came in as a reasonably modest player from Roma, has come into Liverpool under Jurgen Klopp, has become a global sensation.
Yeah.
Um, Obviously he's had a huge part to play in that as the player, but
Mm-hmm.
obviously the club and Jurgen Klopp and people like that have had a massive part to play in that as well. And now you're potentially seeing a situation where in 12 months he could walk away on a free.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's just a weird one, isn't it? That like you could have such an influence in creating this global superstar, and then he walks away on a free, and the club. I mean, some people will say, well, the compensation to the club is the 5 years that he gave you at the top end of the business, and he's won trophies, and he's done this, and the other. But there's a core investment there. Liverpool invested whatever it was, 40 million bringing him in, or 38 million, whatever it was.
Yeah, and
Um,
I don't know if that's what needs to be looked at.
yeah,
If if the initial investment has to be covered, I think that's where you could come up with some sort of a ruling or some sort of scenario which says, okay, I sign player A for 40 million. He comes into my team. his value goes through the roof. Now, if I sell him a year or two down the road, I get the transfer value. But if like that, he's trying to be a clever so and he wants to exit the building and take a 20 or 30 million pound signing on fee and 300 grand a week, what do I get as a club for the investment I've made in him? That's where maybe, 2 years left on the contract, something has to happen where you put the value of what you got the player for back in, which at least covers, you know what I mean? And maybe
Yeah.
there's an issue where they incorporate some of the wages, but things are fixed so that, because obviously, let's look at the Mane situation at the minute with Liverpool. Mane saying he wants to leave. Liverpool are telling Bayern Munich he can leave, but he can leave when it gets to where we want it to get
This
to.
is what we want, yeah.
So if Bayern were able to go back and say, well, listen, we know you signed him from Southampton and he cost X amount of money. Now we feel because he's a player of a certain, age, right, that maybe he's reached what you would call his peak. Yeah. So he's not going to peak, but he may maintain that level, right? We're gonna give you a certain percentage of what you put in at the beginning, which was 40 million, whatever it was, and we're gonna cover, a percentage of what his wages over the last number of years. But I think there has to be some sort of, not necessarily equation, but there has to be some sort of a formula to work this out, which makes it very, very clear for both sides. So even though Liverpool might value at more than that, they turn around and go, well, Bayern have met the structures of what has to be the minimum level, the minimum requirement. You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
as you said earlier, the offer from Bayern at the minute was laughable, but it was at 25 million, right? Somewhere in there. Like, for a player of that age, a player with that type of contract left on it, is it so laughable? I personally don't think it is. Now, I think it's a little like the Arsene Wenger thing for Suarez when they go in. Was it 30 million plus a pound? There was something
40 plus £1, yeah. The
40
Arsenal
plus,
bid, yeah.
so that's somebody trying to be a smart arse as well.
Yeah.
But I think there has to also be value where the club says, yes, we take part in the deal at this level. Okay, our level is here, Bayern's level is here. This is where, and I think it just needs to be a little more set in stone, because then again, it guarantees Liverpool, they're covering their arses with the transfer fee, where we put 40 in, we got 30 out, plus we got 5 years of this guy. We won this trophy, this trophy, this trophy, this trophy. He was a great servant for, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but then I suppose the tough part of that is for Liverpool to replace Mane, it's going to cost them 60 or 70. So
Well,
it eases the pain
you
somewhat
see,
that it's not a
I
free.
don't see that either. I don't see that either, because I think if you look at it, when you bought Mane initially, yeah, he wasn't what you have now. So there's a certain level, where you go in at, let's say it's that 40 million again, and you pick at that and you create. But there's only a certain amount of clubs that can do that, like a Liverpool. You know what I mean?
And there's
Like
only
a,
so many times that a club itself can actually do that as well.
I don't know. I don't, I think over the years we've seen certain clubs do a very, very good job of it. You know, like, and because even when I've heard, Liverpool fans recently talk about who was going to replace such and such and who was going to replace such and such, and you hear them say, well, can't imagine we're going to replace such and such with this guy. And I'm just thinking, Sadio Mane wasn't a big name when he came into Liverpool. Roberto Firmino wasn't a big name when he came in from Liverpool. Mohamed Salah had, been airmailed out of Chelsea. He wasn't a big name. He had started to get the wheels turning at Roma, obviously, which had brought interest from, around the globe and stuff. But that none of those guys were at the level they're at now. So it's been enhanced by Liverpool Football Club. It's been enhanced by Jurgen Klopp. And I think, and I've said this before, time and time again, your crown jewel at Liverpool is Klopp. I believe if he went out, next week and you had, 3 more players, he would get a tune out of them. He might not get the same tune straight away, but given time, he would get the tune that you have at the minute. Maybe he'd better it. Maybe he'd go out and spend, 100 million on 3 players, and in 3 years' time, they'd be worth 3 or 400 million. That's the added value of having a manager and a coach that can do that. And
Yeah.
that's where I think that, a lot of people miss it. Like I
Mm.
heard somebody earlier on talk about Pulisic possibly going to Liverpool, and, the Liverpool fans like, Pulisic is brutal. And I'm just thinking, well, hold on here. His like, he's gone in there at Chelsea, which is a much higher level than, let's say, Mane was at Southampton. You know, he's performed admirably when he's been fit in the league and in the Champions League and stuff like that. He wasn't. He's a smaller fish in a big pond, whereas Mane was a big fish in a small pond at Southampton. So I don't kind of get how guys can turn around and go, "Oh, he's not good enough for us," or "This guy is not good enough." So I think you have to have, there's value attached there as well.
Yeah, I suppose. I suppose if you went back, and this has been the argument, if you went back to 2016 and you were bringing Christian Pulisic into Liverpool, I think I'd stand back and I'd go, yeah, that's pretty cool. But I think you're talking about a different Liverpool at a different stage at the moment. Now you have Liverpool at a level where they're trying to fight for the Premier League and the Champions League against the likes of Man City and these bigger clubs and stuff like that. That Liverpool back in 2016 or 15, whenever Klopp first came in, they were only trying to get back into top four and back into Europe. And I think then it would have suited it, but I'd be concerned about his injury record. I'd be concerned about his goals as well. I don't know whether he'd bring the goals that we need to replace Mane, because his goal scoring record for me is shocking when you actually delve into it and look at it. His injury record is also shocking as well. Now, you might say, well, listen, we've had a number of players at Liverpool that have injury issues, and sports science, and between Klopp and his team and stuff like that, they figured it out. And they've got
Mhm.
these guys on the pitch this season, especially with Matip and Keita and guys like that on a more regular basis, and Thiago. And if he could do that, then I think he could do a job. I just don't know whether he's at that level to bridge that gap, where we're trying to bridge that gap with City, who are bringing in Alvarez and Haaland and Cucurella and players like this and stuff like that. It's going to be really difficult. Like,
I get that, but we just don't know. There's no, like, we've a certain degree of foresight, but I mean, look at all the unbelievable players that clubs have signed over the years, and thought that that was going to be the step that took you closer to the team ahead, and actually it might have been the step that took you further away. So there's no
Lukaku
guarantees.
this season.
So
Lukaku this
you know what I
season.
mean? So that's
Yeah.
why when I hear players talking about, like, here's the thing about football. Let's say the FA Cup. We play the FA Cup every year. We put the non-league teams in it. Why do we put the non-league teams? Why do we give them an opportunity? Because on the day, 11v11, anything can happen.
Mm.
And to build up that level of consistency is a different situation, and it's more difficult to do. But absolutely, guys have to be given a chance and an opportunity in a team like that. Pulisic has never played in a team the way Liverpool are playing now.
Mm.
And for him to come in, and could he make the wheel turn in a similar manner to what Mane did? Me, out for as an outsider, I believe he could. I think the kid's got a lot about him. I think he's been a little bit unlucky with injuries at Chelsea, and I think at times when he has got in, we've looked at him and thought he's the best player by a mile in that set, in that game and stuff like that. He come on, he threatened greatly. He seems to like Anfield as well, by the way, because anytime he
Mm.
comes on there, he really causes trouble. And if you're talking about, the likes of a Diaz and a Salah and a Jota and a Carvalho and a Pulisic, I think he'd fit in there just fine. I just don't like the idea of guys being palmed off necessarily because their fee isn't inflated enough, or we didn't spend enough money on them, and you have to see how somebody fits into a system rather than how much money I spent on them. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? We've
Andy
seen it
Robinson
for a
being the
long time.
prime. Andy Robinson being the prime example.
Well, I mean, like, he's a left back playing left back, right?
Mm.
So it's a good start, isn't it? Like,
Yeah.
we talk about balance and stuff like that and
Mm.
structure, and Klopp knows what he wants from his players, and he knows what attributes he wants them to have, and he also is very good at getting them to play a particular manner and a system and in a position. And I mean, maybe Pulisic hasn't had that at Chelsea.
Yeah.
Maybe Pulisic hasn't had managers that have told him, "I want you to do A, I want you to do B, I want you to do C." because he hasn't had a run of managers at Chelsea. You
Yeah.
know, between his injuries, and then he gets going, and then all of a sudden somebody leaves the building and they don't fancy him too much, and then it can be difficult. You
Yeah,
know,
as Ian has said before, it's a disjointed squad made up of players from several different managers.
yes,
Um, and
absolutely,
and that's a very good point that's made by Ian, So I like that.
very good. Yeah, yeah.
Um, what about in terms of this draft system? I mean, we've seen this draft system in the NFL, and it's like, it does kind of somewhat level the playing field. But I couldn't see a situation in the Premier League where the three teams that come up from the Championship have first stabs on the likes of Haaland and Mbappe and lads like that and all. And this is how they level the playing field. And that
No, but
the team that wins the league, Man City, then is fishing around for the leftovers really at the bottom end of it.
yeah, but you see, the players are looking at it from that point of view. It will be very difficult to implement because at the minute, clubs buy and sell players. Clubs in the NFL don't tend to buy and sell players; they trade in commodities.
Hmm.
So they will trade. So that's the first step I would look at. I would look at the system being more of a trade based system rather than a money based system, which keeps the money in the game rather than it going out to agents and whatnots. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And other outside, I would look at making it a trade system where, okay, I'm a Manchester City, and I want to sign a Haaland. My proposal is put forward to Dortmund on the basis of 2 or 3 or 4 players that come up to a certain price. You know, maybe I you know I go in at the boy Liam Delap, who plays. He's in the Man City reserves. He tends to be on the bench quite a bit for them. Maybe I'm going in. I value him at 15 to 20 million. Maybe I'm going in with a Zach Steffen. Maybe I value him at 10 to 15 million. Maybe I'm going in with an Alexander Zinchenko, another 20 million. And I feel like that's where, the trade becomes possible. Do you know what I mean? 3 or 4 players build up to the price of the player. From a draft point of view, where you draft the players from has to be the same. It has to be the same for all the clubs in the league. Now, we don't
Hmm.
have a system certainly in Premier League football. You could look at maybe the under 23s league, and anyone that's registered for the under 23s league in season 2021 can be drafted up into the Premier League for season 2022. But that
Yeah.
also becomes difficult because not all teams in the league have an under 23s. I mean, we know Brentford scrapped their academy completely a number of years ago, which is
Yeah.
now something they're looking to implement again.
Hmm.
So I think there's a lot of things would have to change for a system like that to work in football. I personally think the first part of the system that needs to be looked at is the salary cap, because I think if you can cap the salary of the player, it becomes easier for clubs to work within it, because then this becomes an actual conversation where 4, 5, or 6 clubs can afford to sign this player because they can keep it within their salary cap. Whereas
Do you see
if
a
you go to a
situation one?
market,
Do you see a situation one day where that happens, that they have salary caps,
has to.
or do they tend to be driven by market influence and stuff like that? I suppose is it in the interest? Is it in the interest of the Premier League and UEFA and organisations like that to have salary caps,
I think so.
or because are they not the beneficiary of this at times as well?
There's 2 ways of looking at it. We know football can be the most corrupt game in the world at times. Um, but I mean, I think if you're looking to take the club back into the hands of the fans, or a lot of the clubs like that, we're going to get to a stage where, these bigger owners are going to step aside. Let's say what happened at Chelsea, albeit it happened for different reasons. But let's say Roman decided, I'm going to leave the frame and I'm going to pass this over to the Chelsea Foundation, Supporters Trust, whatever it is,
Hmm.
and I'm going to give them it. Well, they've got a revenue stream in Chelsea Football Club, but they don't have, that extra that they can dip into their wallets to build up. So I think from that point of view, if you're going to get a lot of clubs that are going to be run by fans, obviously Barcelona and stuff like that, you look at Bayern and all, I think from their point of view, a cap would be really, really good, because all of a sudden then, players are looking at the manager they're going to sign for. Players are looking at the project they're going to get involved in, the how competitive the team is going to be. Like, we know at the minute, right? Frankie de Jong is at Barcelona. United are trying to pry him out of there, yeah?
Yeah.
Now, if the cap on de Jong was 6 million a year, right? Let's just throw this figure out there. We've literally plucked it from the air, so we're not suggesting that. But let's say the cap was 6 million. And that's only where you could go with this, which is that 6 million. Maybe de Jong would have way more options on the table than just United. Do you know what I mean? And maybe maybe that's where the opportunity would arise for him to make a better footballing move for himself. Because if we look at it at the minute, he could absolutely be getting penalised for signing for Man United. Now, from a competitive nature, from a Champions League point of view, all of those things. Now, he will be compensated financially.
Yeah.
And United will probably say, we're going to up your wages a little bit to take away the hit from the no Champions League. We're going to write in a contract that says, if you get us into Champions League, we'll give you X amount. But again, everything's been driven by money, which takes away from the beautiful game a little bit, doesn't it? Where we've got to, we should be trying to get back onto a slightly more even keel, where we're looking at either a draft system or we're looking for a player trading system. Bayern Munich wants Sadio Mane. Okay, that's no problem. But we need something to value off Mane. Now, maybe you only take those players in. Maybe they never even set foot in the door of Liverpool Football Club, but you use them as a bartering tool to go to the next team and bring in your replacement from Sadio Mane. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, because see, my biggest fear at the moment is if the cost of these contracts keeps on escalating and escalating and
Yeah.
escalating. We've seen Mbappe's one in the last 2 or 3 weeks, which is staggering. We've seen Haaland staggering, all these kind of things. I mean, it's ultimately the fans that pick up the tab, don't they? And my biggest concern is then that the typical football fan is priced out of the game, and we end up staying at home all the time. And my biggest fear then is, do stadiums then just become rings of corporate boxes, rings and rings and rings of corporate boxes, and no seats? And what
But I
happens
mean,
then?
there's a huge problem in certain countries with that. Like, you can't get tickets for love nor money for certain games, not just on a football pitch at other levels.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've seen the Champions League this year, 20,000 tickets allocated to each team and 40,000 tickets in corporate.
Yeah,
Like, it's crazy,
the,
but
the Champions League
I'm
final is
thinking
the
15,
Champions League
20
final
years.
is a very,
Yeah.
very different occasion, though.
Yeah, but I'm thinking even
Because
20 years down the line, are you looking at a situation at Old Trafford where it's just rings and rings and rings of corporate boxes and less seats for the fan, the season ticket fan and stuff like that? You know what I mean?
quite possibly, and that's where I'm saying, when you talk about the clubs that have a fan influence behind them, they're the types of clubs that will want the likes of a salary cap, will want the likes of a draft system, will want the likes of a player trading system, because I think they all benefit the club. Whereas I think if you're UEFA or you're FIFA or you're anything like that, and you're getting agents' fees in for a licensing fee and stuff like that, you're going to be happy to let this ball keep snowballing. But we know what happens with these things when they snowball. They eventually get out of control and the system breaks down. We've seen it with a banking system.
Yeah.
So, we have to understand that if it can happen in a situation, with mortgages and with banks and building societies and stuff like that, it can absolutely happen with football clubs, because they're leveraging themselves right up to the hilt with debt. And this is to go out and to sign the best players. This is to sign, the most talented players who give them the opportunity. But again, that's the club pimping their fans out, for want of a better word.
And we've seen what's happened with a lot of these clubs. I mean, when you get a jolt to the system, like the pandemic, when you get a financial jolt like that, now again, it could be in banking, it could be in
Yeah,
devaluation of a currency, it could be a
absolutely.
situation, it could be a war, it could be anything, you know what I mean? And it just puts them on the cusp. Like we've seen the situation there, the difficulty that Barcelona's had now with its finances, the
Yeah,
difficulty that Inter Milan is facing, and various other clubs and stuff like that. You know what I mean? We've seen even the Premier League clubs having the rally in terms of support and
the
stuff like that to get
the
through that
Inter
pandemic and
the
stuff.
Inter Milan case is it's such a strange case for me. If we look at it, like they sign Lukaku from United,
Mm,
they sell Lukaku to Chelsea, they try to take Lukaku back from Chelsea,
yeah.
and all the time still own United over 40 million.
That's an interesting one as well in terms when
And
we
I'm
talk
like,
about contracts, isn't it? Because what happens is if you buy a player off a club, you
yeah,
shouldn't be allowed to sell that player on till you've cleared the back contract there with another club. It'd be like you
absolutely,
taking a car out on payments and
yeah,
selling it to a guy and not clearing the
yes,
finance or the
yeah,
payments. It's crazy.
absolutely. That's
Crazy.
exactly what, and
Yeah.
that again. That's why I've kind of pulled it up. That has to be looked at.
Yeah.
That day obviously it was structured in a certain way. It's 10 million a season, it's 15 million a season, whatever it is. Don't know the makeup of the deal, but when the premium is put down, I mean, let's just say, for instance, the 100 and whatever million euro, 115 million euro they paid for Lukaku, Chelsea,
100. Yeah,
100
probably
million,
115 million euro. Yeah.
yeah,
100
euros,
sterling. Yeah.
yeah. So the 115 million euros. Let's say there was 50 million euros still out to United. Chelsea give the 50 million up front to Inter. Inter have to use the 50 to pay off what was owed on Lukaku. The 65 million can become in the payments, and that will be the profit of the contract. But
Or
United
or
are
or
now
Chel-
out of the
or
deal.
or Chelsea send the 47 to United to clear the back debt, and they send the
Absolutely.
balance on to Inter.
But we know, the likelihood is the deal is going to be structured where all the money's up front. A lot of deals aren't structured like that. They're they're structured in a way where we'll pay X amount down front, but at least if they covered the price of what was owed on the finance, let's say,
Mm.
it would
Previous
clear
debt.
United from the loop,
Mm.
right? It would clear the previous debt. Inter would now own nothing out and would have 15 million every summer coming in for the next 4 years.
Yeah.
And they could run their club in such. They give them the money, they obviously piss it away, and now their hole has gotten bigger because they still owe the 40 million and they don't now have a Lukaku or
Mm.
a Scudetto. And,
Yeah.
it's.
And players and key players leaving on a free as well. We seen Perisic going out to Spurs on a free and stuff like that. Who would have been
But
an
by the
asset
looks
to
of it,
them, you
they're
know?
gonna replace them with two free signings because I mean Dybala looks like he's all but done to Inter,
Mm.
and Henrik Mkhitaryan has refused his contract that Roman has told him he's going to Inter for free.
Mm.
So,
Yeah.
and this is where I see a lot of the stuff. A lot of this happens a lot more in Italy.
It's
You
so
know, the,
complex, isn't it? The whole contract situation. It's an absolute spider's web, isn't it? When you delve into it.
yeah,
I was looking at some stuff today. We're obviously not going to talk about it on this show. It's probably for a different episode. Some of the stuff and the dealings and stuff that goes on, it's borderline criminal, isn't it? At times, it's crazy. Like,
plenty of
um,
criminals in football, I'd imagine.
absolutely. Let's raise the mood on it anyway. I pray that we can afford ticket prices going into the future. Some of the maddest clauses, I picked out some of the maddest clauses ever inserted into football contracts, and I have to say I had a lot of fun with this today. It was a throwback for me thinking back to the old Premier League years and stuff like that.
Yeah,
The Luis Suarez one, the no biting clause. Like, I just, isn't it just mad, isn't it?
to think that somebody decided we want this clause. Like, I mean, how do you even bring a clause like that up?
Yeah.
you know and how do you, okay, if you're convicted of biting a player, you lose X amount of your wages, you're fined X amount, you don't, you don't qualify for that extra year on the contract, whatever.
Yeah.
It's like mental, absolutely
This
mental.
isn't this Gaza with the house for the parents and the sunbed for the sister type of stuff, isn't it? Like it's just
Absolutely.
mad, isn't it?
Yeah,
What about this other one, Giuseppe Reina, the house building clause? He signed for 3 years, and every year the club had to build him a house. So at the end of it, he'd end up with this property portfolio. Obviously, he had great insight in terms
Yeah.
of how property was going to go. I
Uh-huh.
think what happened was what they didn't insert. I read into this one and it was hilarious because it really was intriguing. What happened was they never inserted into the contract the specification for the house. So they literally could have built him a doll's house. There was no specification. And this ended up having to go. I think it was 2 years into the contract, I think he left. And after 2 years, I had to go to a court of arbitration to give him compensation in terms of what they felt what was meant by the terms of the contract. But they didn't insert into the contract at all what the house should be, what the specification would be. Could be a 10-bed mansion, could be a 2-bed bungalow, could have been anything,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? So it's kind of weird. But another very interesting one. Everyone's familiar with the Dennis Bergkamp one. I mean, his road stories are legendary in terms of he couldn't fly and stuff like that. So they used to send him off days in advance for European matches and stuff like that.
You
Um,
know what they should have done for him?
you would have a good contact there for him, would you?
Oh, they should have sent him to our friend Ruth Allen Hypnotherapy, and Ruth would have sorted out Dennis out because she
There you
sorted
go.
me out good and proper. Little plug
Yeah,
there for our friend
there's
Ruth.
a good plug. Yeah, I remember there was one, wasn't there? Wasn't there one time where they had drawn someone in Europe? I'm not sure whether it was a Dutch game or an Arsenal game, but it was literally polar ends of Europe. And I think they sent them off on what they called, I think it was either a 6-day or a 7-day road trip to get to this place to play. And I think by sending them on that and then having to bring them back, he missed 2 league games. Or he missed a league game and a cup game to play in the European game or something like that. I just thought absolute madness, it was crazy. I remember it back in the day. It was just absolutely crazy.
Much easier now, though. Obviously, well, look, I mean, we were away at the weekend in Paris, and we met a number of English people, and one of the guys that was staying in our hotel had taken the Eurostar from St Pancras Station in London,
Mm,
2.5 hours, and it brought him into the Disneyland park in two and a half
yeah,
hours on the
yeah,
Eurostar. Now, I think it cost €180 per person round trip. But when you think about it, 2.5 hours on this, boom, your job done.
yeah. You
Somebody
could
else
nearly,
told us
you could nearly day trip it.
you could possibly day trip it if you wanted, right?
Yeah,
You absolutely could, depending on
mm,
the first one out and the last one back and stuff like that.
yeah,
And you've no travel when you get there. The train station is in the park. That gives you your gateway to Europe. And I mean, from there, you could train on further, then you could coach. So, I mean,
yeah,
you could be in Spain. I know there's a ferry goes from Dublin to Santander in Spain.
yeah.
And I think it's a little under 24 hours. And then you
Mm,
can drive on down further. So, I mean, you could be in Spain, no flight, 36 hours.
yeah,
Way more manageable now than was previously,
yeah.
um, if you weren't going to fly. So I don't think Dennis's clause would be as difficult in this day and age. Although I think there's a lot of clubs would prefer not to have to deal with it.
Yeah, any time I seen the Dennis Bergkamp situation, I always thought, I remember the A team with Mr. T, and they
Yeah,
used to walk him up to the plane, he'd say, "You're not getting on," and they just jab him with the injection in the shoulder, boom, knock him out and carry him on and all. And I often thought of that going, yeah, absolutely. Stefan Schwartz, no space clause. This,
I actually remember this
yeah,
very, very well. He had bought flights on the Richard Branson expedition
yeah,
to the moon. He had bought the first lot of commercial flights.
mm,
I remember this like it was yesterday, um, because initially when I heard it, I'd say this is around about 94, 95. And when I heard it, I was like, did I hear that right? I was like, are we going to the moon? Because at that stage, I'm 10 or 11 years of age. Now you think all these years later, and I think we've only in the last 18 months started to do these commercial flights to the moon and stuff, haven't we?
mm,
Where people
yeah,
have bought tickets for it and stuff like that.
yeah. They've started
Um,
by bringing them just out of the atmosphere, haven't they, and kind of done loops of the earth and stuff and all. Yeah,
yeah. So you just think like this is like
30 years ago, nearly.
Possibly 30 years ago. Yeah,
Nearly
that's
30
possibly
years ago.
30 years ago. You know, and maybe he thought it was going to come to fruition a lot quicker.
Do you know what I was thinking as well? I mean, I think, am I right in thinking he was at Sunderland at the time? I think he was
No,
at
so
was
he
he?
was at Arsenal initially,
Yeah.
and he left Arsenal. And did
I
he
thought
not
he was
end
at,
up at? Did he not end up at Palace?
maybe it was, I'm not too sure. But I remember looking at it and thinking, Jesus,
He
they
was
must
at
pay.
he was definitely at Valencia as well.
Yeah.
He's at
Yeah, no,
Valencia and
he was
Arsenal.
definitely in the UK when this happened. Because I remember it
So it
being
was
a big deal.
Arsenal. Arsenal was the first club he signed for
Yeah,
in the UK. But I
yeah.
think then he filtered down the system a little bit. Could have been a Sunderland, could have been a Palace,
I
something
think
like
I
that.
think he was at Sunderland because I remember thinking, Jesus, the money must be good there. Because I was thinking if he was at Arsenal, imagine the conversation with him and Bearcamp over breakfast.
Yeah, you don't want to fly to France. I'm looking to get to the moon.
Yeah, absolutely. Neymar's won the friends visitation clause. Um, this is the one where he wanted his friends flown over from Brazil every 2 weeks, um, to visit him and get together and stuff like that. And Barcelona was supposed to pick up the tab.
I've just checked. He played for Sunderland.
Sunderland when he did. Yeah, I was thinking that because I
He
was
did
thinking,
play for Valencia. He
yeah,
did
but I
play
think it
for
was Sunderland when
Fiorentina
he bought this
and
this
Arsenal.
space thing. Yeah, it was
Well,
Sunderland when he bought it.
yeah. So he actually joined Arsenal in '94,
Mm,
and he then went to Fiorentina, Valencia, and it was '99 that he arrived at Sunderland. So it was one of them. The Neymar is a strange one. You know, the Brazilians are party boys anyway. Hasn't he
mm.
missed his sister's birthday? He's gone suspended for his sister's birthday the last 5 years in a row, if I'm right.
Yeah, he just goes over every time, doesn't he?
But he gets a suspension. He racks up his yellow cards, and they can tell you now
Yeah,
when he's going to get booked based on when
yeah.
the sister's birthday is, and you're just
Or,
thinking,
or he gets injured.
or he gets injured, and you're just going, this is crazy.
Yeah. Um, Ronaldinho is the partying clause. Ronaldinho, who went back to South America, he had a clause in his contract that says twice a week he can go out nightclubbing. There's no issue. It's the same type thing, isn't it? Like this runs deep, doesn't it? Really, with these guys.
It's having your cake and eating, isn't it?
Yeah. The one I really enjoyed today, I'll finish out with two Liverpool ones, obviously, but they weren't the Neil Ruddock, the white gang clause one was at Crystal Palace. Simon Jordan inserted this that he had to be of a certain weight, and if he went above that weight, he get fined X amount of money. Which I thought was hilarious. I'd imagine even trying to do that today, like that.
Well, I mean, like players now, they're tested an awful lot more for stuff like that. You know, like
Yeah,
they go in and they've obviously got to be an optimum weight, and they're looking to try and
mm,
maintain while still providing enough for your body and stuff like that. But I mean,
mm,
like there was just so much. It's a professionalism thing, really, isn't it? With Ruddock,
yeah,
where that's what Jordan was questioning, isn't it? You know, is this guy professional enough to play at our club? And that's
yeah,
kind of what he did. But yeah, it's morally how right it is. I don't know, but
yeah. Poor old Neil. He was a great baller, but he was always susceptible to a bit of weight, wasn't
it's quite a
he?
few lads at that age, wasn't there? In
Yeah,
that era, El Neville Southall at Everton always looked like he'd just come out of a Weight Watchers ad.
yeah. I remember them. I remember I went to a Liverpool pre-season game against Shells at Talca. And I remember Ruddock walking out, and I remember the crowd giving him awful stick. He was fairly out of shape now, let's say, and the crowd are giving him socks.
Yeah,
And we finish out Stig Bjornby, who played for Liverpool, the no skiing clause. He was big into skiing. His dad, I think, was an Olympic ski jumper, believe it or
right.
not. And he was big into skiing and stuff like that. But I think when he signed for Liverpool, it was like, no more
No,
skiing. That was the end of that. But
yeah.
yeah, no, just it's interesting when you go back, and I'd implore our viewers to go and look back at some of these contracts. Some of them are absolutely hilarious. Some of the clauses and stuff like that, and there's crazy ones. I mean, we spoke earlier about the Gaza one, what he was looking for in his contract that time with Spurs and stuff like that, and all. It was,
Even the Haaland one, the talks, the deal when he was coming into City, which was 20 for the father and 20 for the or sorry, 10 for the father and 10 for the agent,
yeah,
on top of his own signing on fee. And you've heard that they wanted this and they wanted that. Didn't we miss out on something recently? Pretty sure United missed out on someone quite recently, and it was over the buying of a house for the parents. I'm trying to think who it was. It was someone coming in from France, maybe. You know,
Okay.
now akin to a Michael Essien or a something like that.
Yeah.
And the deal didn't happen. And when we found out why the deal didn't happen, it was all down to the fact that, United had said they paid the 30 million, they do this, they do this, they do this. And then at the last minute, there was, oh, and we want this for X, Y, or Z. And they started they
Yeah.
started pulling the plug, and all of a sudden he went off somewhere else and became, you thought, oh, great now.
Yeah, I think we the same when we tried to sign Fakir, if you remember.
Right?
They came out saying that they had found an issue in the medical, but apparently in the corridor, apparently Fakir's brother was the agent, and apparently he tried to hold Liverpool over a barrel as well. And Liverpool put it down because we know he had an issue with the knee, but he had done a
Yes.
medical. And I think he'd already passed the medical. We were about to announce him. And apparently the brother came in looking for an extra few bob. And it soured the whole deal. And then I think the cover up for it was, as far as I know, was that something had shown up in the medical at a very late stage. But everyone knew it was the brother was trying to barrel bomb them. So, yeah, interesting. But yeah, just go show you these contracts. But listen, absolute pleasure having you on. Great talking about this stuff. It does jog some memories, doesn't it, when you go back through this stuff?
Yeah, and
It's
to be honest with you, it's quite an interesting subject and topic.
yeah,
I certainly see it as one anyway. I just think things have to change. I think obviously, player power is one thing, but I think there's got to be a balance. I think for a long time the clubs had the upper hand. I think now
mm,
the players have wrestled it back to a degree, but I think we're going to have to get to a stage where everybody feels like they're getting something out of this and it's on an even keel,
mm,
and redress the balance of power in this, because otherwise, what happens to the beautiful game that we all love and cherish? Does it become, as you said, does it take ordinary fans out of football? Because if it does, football will die in its arse without fans.
yeah. We know what happens when you roll a snowball down a hill.
You know,
Doesn't tend to end well. Well, listen, it's been a pleasure having you on talking about these contracts. No doubt they create a lot of debate. Depends on whether you're an agent, a footballer, or the owner of a club. Um, but this is the upper tier. Let us know your thoughts down in the comments on these contracts. What way do you see it going in the future? Um,
I just, from a United point of view, just before you finish, we obviously found out that David De Gea was taking quite a substantial pay cut to sign a longer term deal at United. Um, he had been on 375 grand a week at United,
yeah.
and he was going to step that down to 250 on the basis he would sign a new 4 to 5 year deal.
Mm,
And I think there's talk now of maybe him being given the captain's armband and stuff like that. That's what the word on the ground seems to be. Like, again, that's back to the James Milner kind of thing at Liverpool. They're the types of things we want to see. We want to see players, not trying to put clubs over a barrel without feeling like they're not being compensated for, what they bring to the table as well. And it's that fine line, isn't it?
yeah, absolutely. It's and as we look at it, like we commend people like James Milner and stuff like that, and our concern really going forward as well is obviously loyalty is a thing as well, and
100%.
we spoke last week about, like, are we seeing the likes of, say, the Lampards and the Gerrards and the
Mm-hmm.
the Scholes and these players that stay at clubs all their life, with this situation evolving and stuff like that, is that really the end of that now, and the romance of that being that you're a one club guy, or that you've committed to that, or that you understand the implications and the situations of what you're in, but you also understand that, like, this is a club who has given you an opportunity and stuff like that, and you also have to take that in regard and not just it be all one way all the time. But like I
Yeah.
said, it's an intriguing subject. I would implore any of our viewers, and we appreciate you all viewing and subscribing and stuff like that. Keep it up the upper tier there in YouTube. We're growing on a daily basis. We are taking this time in the summer to do different kind of shows like this. So if you have any suggestions on shows you'd like us to do and stuff like that, while we have the time and football is kind of dampened down a little bit, let us know, because we love talking about topics like this, and certainly for me it's brilliant. I love doing the background work on it and stuff like that, and especially when you see some of these like maddest ever clauses and stuff like that, it jogs my memory of football when I was younger and watching it and stuff like that, and bear camp road trips and all that kind of stuff. It was really interesting going back through that.
Down to
Until
Panic and
next.
Icos on a Tuesday night, huh?
That's it, yeah. And you're leaving on the Friday and you missed the league game or something like that. Who knows? Um, but as always, if you want to contact the show, we're on Facebook, Instagram, we're on Twitter at this stage. You know where we are. We're on TikTok as well, dropping clips every day. Having fun out there on TikTok. Obviously lighting it up with people and stuff like that. And we appreciate their support out there as well. Audio shows, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Amazon Music. And we will talk to you again real soon. Cheers, bud.
Nice, pal.